World War II is one of the most studied conflicts in history. However, despite decades of research, declassified archives, and testimonies, there are still events that no one has been able to fully explain. Unexplained decisions, secret operations, disappearances, and events that fell outside official records continue to raise questions to this day. Some mysteries involve world leaders, others, anonymous soldiers and forgotten missions. In this video, we explore 20 enigmas of World War II that continue to challenge historians and that history so far has not been able to solve. Rudolph Hess's solo flight to Scotland. On the night of May 10, 1941, as Europe burned in total war, one of Adolf Hitler's closest associates made a decision that, to this day, continues to baffle historians and analysts. Rudolph Hess, the Führer's deputy and one of the most important figures in the Nazi Party, boarded a Messerschmitt Bf 110 and took off in complete secrecy for Scotland. There was no official announcement, no recorded military orders, and no coordination with the Luftwaffe. It was a solitary, unauthorized, and deeply enigmatic flight. Hess was no minor figure. From the early years of Nazism, he had been one of Hitler's most loyal collaborators, participating in the failed coup of 1923 and accompanying him during his imprisonment, where he helped write Mein Kampf. By 1941, he held the position of deputy to the Führer, with direct access to the inner circle of Nazi power. His sudden decision to fly alone into enemy territory was, in itself, almost inconceivable. Hess's plan was to reach Scotland to establish contact with sectors of the British aristocracy who, he believed, would be willing to negotiate a separate peace with Germany. He believed that the United Kingdom could be persuaded to abandon the war if the preservation of its empire were guaranteed, thus allowing Germany to concentrate on its true objective, the invasion of the Soviet Union. This conviction raises one of the first major questions. Was this a personal initiative, or was Hess acting under the conviction that he somehow represented Hitler's hidden desires? During the flight, Hess cruised for hours over the North Sea, evading air defenses and battling adverse weather conditions. Finally, running out of fuel, he parachuted to safety near Glasgow. He was captured shortly afterward by a local farmer, wounded but alive. From that moment on, the mystery deepened even further. British authorities were both surprised and baffled. The fact that one of the Nazi leaders appeared alone without an escort or official backing generated immediate disbelief. Hess claimed to be carrying a message of peace and requested a meeting with the Duke of Hamilton, whom he believed to be influential within circles favorable to an agreement with Germany. However, the British government rejected any negotiations and treated the matter with extreme caution. From Berlin, the reaction was immediate and brutal. Hitler publicly declared that Hess had acted on his own and suffered from mental instability. He was stripped of all his posts, and the Nazi regime attempted to erase him from German political life. But this official response raised even more questions. Why would someone so close to Hitler risk everything on a mission without backup? Did he really act alone, or was he being used as a disposable emissary to probe for a possible peace? During his captivity in the United Kingdom, Hess was interrogated for years. His statements were confused, contradictory, and at times delusional. He claimed to be acting out of ideals of peace, but also showed signs of paranoia. This fueled another line of mystery. Was Hess mentally unstable, or was he feigning illness to conceal the true nature of his mission? British medical reports failed to reach a definitive conclusion. After the war, Hess was tried at Nuremberg. Unlike other Nazi leaders, he was not sentenced to death, but to life imprisonment. He spent more than 40 years incarcerated in Spandau prison, becoming its only prisoner for decades. Throughout that time, he never offered a clear and coherent explanation for his flight. He died in 1987, officially by suicide, although even his death generated new suspicions and theories. Rudolf Hess's solo flight remains one of the greatest mysteries of World War II. No conclusive documents prove that Hitler authorized the mission, but it's also difficult to believe that a man in his position would have acted entirely alone. Was it a desperate act of idealism, a failed secret operation, or a covert attempt to negotiate peace gone wrong? More than 8 decades later, the mystery remains unsolved. Still classified files, contradictory testimonies, and deliberate silences have prevented this chapter from being definitively closed. Hess's flight is perplexing not only because of what happened, but also because of what might have changed had his mission succeeded. One plane, one man, and one of the most inexplicable decisions of the entire war. The true final destination of Adolf Hitler. In the final days of April 1945, Berlin was a city in ruins. The Red Army advanced street by street as the Third Reich crumbled. In the heart of the German capital, beneath the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler remained holed up in his bunker with his inner circle. The official version maintains that on April 30th, 1945, the Nazi dictator committed suicide alongside Eva Braun to avoid capture by the Soviets. However, despite being accepted for decades, this version has never completely silenced the doubts. According to testimonies gathered after the war, Hitler shot himself in the head while Eva Braun ingested cyanide. Their bodies, in accordance with his own orders, were taken outside the bunker, doused with gasoline and partially burned. When Soviet troops captured the site, they found only charred remains that were difficult to identify. From the outset, this created uncertainty. There was no clearly recognizable body, no conclusive official photographs existed, and identification was based on bone and dental fragments. The Soviet Union actively contributed to the confusion. For years, Soviet authorities offered conflicting accounts of Hitler's fate. At times, they claimed he was dead, at others, they hinted that he had escaped. Joseph Stalin even publicly declared that Hitler might be alive and hiding somewhere in the world. These claims not only fueled rumors but also sowed distrust even among the Western allies. One of the most debated elements has been the forensic evidence. The identification of the remains relied primarily on Hitler's dental records, confirmed by his dentist and his assistant. While many historians consider this evidence sufficient, others point out that the remains were never independently examined by international experts. Furthermore, the bone fragments preserved by the Soviet Union remained classified for decades, reinforcing suspicions. From this lack of conclusive evidence, alternative theories emerged. Some argue that Hitler managed to escape Berlin in the final days of the war using secret routes organized by the SS. These theories claim that he fled first to Spain or Italy and then to South America, where other high-ranking Nazis found refuge. Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil frequently appear in these narratives, fueled by local testimonies and unverified documents. Interest in these theories was further reinforced by the confirmation that many Nazi criminals did manage to escape from Europe. Cases like those of Adolf Eichmann and Klaus Barbie demonstrated that escape networks existed and were effective. This led some to wonder, if they could escape, why couldn't Hitler? However, unlike these fugitives, Hitler was the most wanted man in the world, with a face impossible to hide and an unprecedented historical responsibility. Another line of mystery centers on Hitler's behavior in his final days. Some witnesses described a man who was defeated, ill, and resigned to death. Others, however, noted moments of lucidity and planning, which some have interpreted as evidence of a possible escape. These contradictions have been exploited by theories suggesting doubles, hoaxes, or staged suicides. During the Cold War, intelligence agencies such as the FBI and CIA received numerous reports claiming to have seen Hitler alive in various locations around the world. Many of these reports were investigated and ultimately dismissed for lack of evidence, but their very existence helped to keep the mystery alive. Some of these documents were declassified decades later, showing that even the Western powers considered, at least briefly, the possibility that Hitler had survived. In more recent years, scientific studies have attempted to settle the debate. Research conducted on bone fragments attributed to Hitler indicated that some did not match his biological profile, which reopened the controversy. However, most historians agree that these inconsistencies do not invalidate the dental evidence, considered the strongest proof of his death in 1945. The true final fate of Adolf Hitler remains one of the most debated mysteries of World War II, not so much because of the absolute lack of evidence, but because of the sum of silences, contradictions, and political manipulations that surrounded the end of the Reich. Many experts believe Hitler died in his bunker, defeated and isolated. Others believe the shadows surrounding his final days leave a margin of doubt that cannot be ignored. Beyond the theories, the mystery reflects something deeper, the difficulty of accepting a banal end for a figure who embodied one of history's greatest horrors. Perhaps that's why the question of Adolf Hitler's ultimate fate continues to fascinate the world. Because as long as there are unopened files and contradictory testimonies, history once again resists giving a definitive answer. Missing Nazi gold and the hidden treasures of the Third Reich. As the Third Reich advanced across Europe, so too did a silent and systematic operation aimed at amassing unprecedented wealth. Gold, jewelry, works of art, foreign currency and valuables were confiscated by the Nazi state from occupied governments, central banks, private institutions, and most brutally, from millions of Holocaust victims. This massive accumulation of wealth not only financed the German war effort, but also gave rise to one of the greatest financial enigmas of the 20th century, the ultimate fate of the missing Nazi gold. From the early years of the regime, looting was a state policy. The Reichsbank received tons of gold from countries such as Austria, Czechoslovakia, Belgium, and the Netherlands, as well as ingots melted down from jewelry, coins, and personal belongings confiscated from concentration camp prisoners. This gold was recorded, refined, and reused to pay for armaments, raw materials, and strategic alliances. However, as German defeat became inevitable, the priority shifted from spending the gold to hiding it. In the final years of the war, high-ranking Nazi officials began dispersing stockpiles throughout Germany and surrounding territories. Abandoned mines, railway tunnels, alpine lakes, and remote castles were converted into makeshift hiding places. The objective was clear: to prevent the gold from falling into Allied hands and to preserve resources for a hypothetical resurgence of Nazism, or for the personal survival of its leaders after defeat. One of the best-known cases is that of Lake Toplitz in Austria. There, divers have recovered boxes of counterfeit banknotes belonging to Operation Bernhard, a Nazi plan to flood the British economy with fake pounds sterling. But for decades, speculation has persisted that gold ingots and secret documents still lie hidden at the bottom of the lake. Despite numerous expeditions, the mystery remains, fueled by partial discoveries and unexplored areas. Another enigma surrounds the Nazi armored trains laden with treasure. According to numerous accounts, entire convoys vanished during the chaos at the end of the war. The most famous is the so-called Gold Train from Poland, which supposedly transported gold, weapons, and works of art to Germany. Although intensive searches have been carried out, conclusive proof of its existence has never been found, which has generated debates between historians and treasure hunters. Art looting is also part of this mystery. Hitler and other Nazi leaders planned to create a gigantic museum in Linz that would house the greatest works of art in Europe. Thousands of paintings and sculptures were stolen and stored in secret warehouses. After the war, the Allies recovered a significant portion of these works, but many never resurfaced. Their whereabouts remain unknown, and some may still be hidden in private collections or concealed in locations yet to be discovered. This complex network also involved international banks and financial institutions. Part of the Nazi gold was transferred to accounts in neutral countries such as Switzerland, Spain, and Portugal. While some transactions were documented and subsequently investigated, others disappeared amid opaque operations and incomplete records. The complexity of the wartime financial system makes it difficult to know how much wealth was actually recovered and how much was lost forever. Following the German surrender, the Allies launched an intensive search for Nazi gold. Significant reserves were recovered in salt mines such as Merkers, where tons of gold from the Reichsbank were found. However, even these discoveries confirmed that not everything was there. Significant quantities were missing, and no one could explain with certainty where they had gone. Some theories suggest that some of the gold was used to finance the escape routes of Nazi criminals to South America. Others maintain that it was distributed among high-ranking SS officers as personal insurance for exile. There is also the hypothesis that certain Western governments or intelligence services turned a blind eye to these riches in exchange for information or cooperation during the early years of the Cold War. The mystery of Nazi gold is not just a matter of lost treasure, but of historical memory and justice. Each missing ingot represents, in many cases, property stolen from victims who were never compensated. The impossibility of fully tracing these riches raises uncomfortable questions about responsibilities, silences, and complicity in the aftermath of the war. More than 80 years later, Nazi gold continues to fuel searches, investigations, and theories. Modern expeditions continue to explore lakes, mountains, and tunnels in Central Europe. Still, classified archives may hold crucial clues. But to this day, a significant portion of the wealth looted by the Third Reich remains undiscovered. This mystery persists because it's not just about finding gold, but about reconstructing a truth fragmented by chaos, defeat, and the vested interests of many who want certain stories to remain hidden. As long as hidden treasures and lost documents exist, Nazi gold will remain one of the most unsettling enigmas of World War II, a golden shadow that refuses to disappear from history. Room 428 and the suspicious death of Heinrich Himmler. In May 1945, with the Third Reich already defeated, Heinrich Himmler, one of the most powerful and feared men in the Nazi regime, was trying to disappear into the chaos of the post-war period. As head of the SS and principal architect of the concentration camp system, he knew that if he were captured, there would be no mercy. Disguised with false documents and a false identity, Himmler was arrested by a British patrol in northern Germany without being immediately recognized. After his identity was confirmed, he was taken to a British detention center and housed in room 428. There, on May 23, 1945, the episode occurred that would give rise to one of the most persistent mysteries of the end of the war. According to the official version, Himmler committed suicide by biting into a cyanide capsule hidden in his mouth during a medical examination. He died within minutes, thus avoiding a public trial for his crimes. However, the circumstances of his death raised suspicions from the outset. Despite being searched on several occasions, no one detected the poison capsule. This raised a key question: how did he manage to keep the cyanide after multiple inspections? Some reports suggest negligence on the part of the guards. Others hint that he may have received help or that security measures were not as strict as claimed. Room 428 quickly became a symbol of mystery. There was no thorough autopsy or detailed photographic documentation of the body. Furthermore, Himmler's body was buried in a secret location to prevent his grave from becoming a Nazi pilgrimage site, eliminating any future possibility of independent forensic examinations. There are theories that go beyond suicide. Some maintain that Himmler was silenced to prevent him from revealing compromising information about secret negotiations with the Allies in the final weeks of the war. Others suggest that his death was convenient for many, as it prevented a trial that could have exposed networks, complicity, and uncomfortable post-war decisions. Although most historians accept that Heinrich Himmler committed suicide, gaps in the records and the speed with which the case was closed keep the doubt alive. Room 428 was not only the place where one of the main Nazi leaders died, but the scene of an abrupt end that left more questions than answers. The German ghost convoy lost in the African desert. During the North African campaign, the desert became as deadly an enemy as the fighting itself. Amidst this unforgiving landscape, a story emerged that, with the passage of time, transformed into one of the lesser-known but most unsettling mysteries of World War II: the disappearance of a German convoy in the heart of the African desert, with no clear traces of combat or confirmed survivors. According to various testimonies and fragmentary documents, the convoy departed from an Africa Corps base on a crucial logistical mission. It consisted of several trucks, possibly escorted, transporting supplies, fuel, and, according to some accounts, classified material or even valuables. At some point along its route, the convoy simply stopped responding and never reached its destination. No enemy attacks or clear signs of engagement were reported. The Sahara Desert and the arid regions of North Africa were vast, poorly mapped, and extremely dangerous. A sandstorm could disorient even the most experienced units. Some theories suggest that the convoy was lost due to a navigational error, becoming trapped without water or fuel, condemning its occupants to a slow and silent death under the scorching sun. However, what fuels the mystery is the almost complete absence of remains. Unlike other missing convoys, no clear concentrations of vehicles, skeletons, or military equipment have been found to confirm a large-scale catastrophe. This has led to speculation that the convoy may have been deliberately diverted, secretly captured, or even destroyed without leaving any visible traces. Some local accounts describe military columns seen moving into remote areas, never designated for regular operations. Other theories point to a possible ambush by Allied forces or local guerrillas, although the lack of official reports offers little support for this hypothesis. There has also been speculation that the convoy was carrying something so valuable that its disappearance was intentionally covered up by the German commanders themselves. Decades later, desert explorers and archaeologists have found isolated Africa Corps vehicles in regions extremely far from known routes, proving that German units did indeed penetrate deep into the desert. These findings revived the idea that the phantom convoy might still be buried under the sand, waiting to be discovered. The German phantom convoy represents the lesser-known side of the war in Africa, where the silence of the desert could erase entire armies without leaving any witnesses. Although the most likely explanation is a combination of disorientation, extreme weather, and abandonment, the lack of definitive evidence keeps the legend alive. To this day, the African desert still holds secrets from World War II, and among them the lost German convoy remains as a reminder that in war, not all defeats were fought on the battlefield. Some were simply lost in the sand, never to be told. Operation Valkyrie. Were there more conspirators who were never revealed? On July 20th, 1944, an explosion rocked the Wolf's Lair, Adolf Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. Operation Valkyrie, the most audacious plot to assassinate the Führer and overthrow the Nazi regime from within, was underway. Although the bomb planted by Klaus von Stauffenberg failed to kill Hitler, the attempted coup left a profound mark on the history of the Third Reich. However, what happened next raises a disturbing mystery. Were those really the only conspirators, or was there a much wider network that never came to light? Officially, the Nazi regime identified several hundred people involved. Army officers, civilians, aristocrats, and former opponents of Nazism were arrested, interrogated, and in many cases executed after summary trials. The repression was brutal and intended to serve as an example to others. However, even amid this ruthless hunt, there were indications that not all the actual participants were discovered and that other names never appeared on the official lists. The very workings of the conspiracy suggest a more extensive structure. Valkyrie was not just an assassination attempt, but a coup d'état plan that required the mobilization of military units in various German cities. For this to be possible, the silent cooperation of numerous officers was needed who, even without planting bombs, allowed orders to circulate or decided not to interfere at key moments. After the failed assassination attempt, many suspects managed to evade the Gestapo. Some destroyed evidence, others were protected by superiors or simply left no clear trace of their involvement. There were also officers who, seeing the plot fail, denied any involvement and were considered too valuable to the war effort to be thoroughly investigated. There are also questions about the archives. In the final months of the Reich, numerous documents were deliberately destroyed. This makes it impossible to fully reconstruct the true extent of the conspiracy. Some historians argue that certain names were intentionally erased to avoid mass purges that would have further weakened the German army at a critical time. Another enigmatic aspect is the post-war silence. Many surviving officers continued their careers in post-war Germany, especially in the new Federal Army. In their memoirs, several of them downplayed their knowledge of Valkyrie or avoided the topic altogether. This has led to suspicions that some former conspirators chose silence to protect their future and that of their associates. Even among the plot's leaders themselves, there was reluctance to reveal names. Some believed that even after Hitler's fall, exposing all those involved would only prolong the bloodshed. This culture of discretion contributed to many connections never being officially documented. The question remains, how many men and women actually supported Operation Valkyrie from the shadows? The exact number will likely never be known. What does seem clear is that the July 20 attack was only the visible part of a broader, fragmented and silent internal resistance. Operation Valkyrie failed not only because of Hitler's survival, but also because many of its key players remained hidden, undecided, or invisible. And in that invisibility lies the mystery, a conspiracy that could have been much bigger than official history dared to tell. The U-boat submarine that arrived in Argentina after the war. In July 1945, when World War II had officially ended in Europe, an unexpected visitor appeared off the coast of Argentina. It was a German submarine, a U-boat of the Kriegsmarine, which surfaced weeks after the surrender of the Third Reich. Its arrival immediately sparked suspicion, rumors, and one of the most persistent mysteries of the conflict. What was a Nazi submarine doing sailing to South America when the war was already over? The submarine was the U-530, which surrendered on July 10, 1945, in the port of Mar del Plata. Shortly afterward, another submarine, the U-977, arrived on the same Argentine coast in August. Both had spent months at sea, avoiding surrender to the European allies and undertaking a long and perilous journey across the Atlantic. The news caused international shock and fueled theories that continue to circulate even today. The official accounts from their crews claimed they had set sail without knowing the exact outcome of the war, or that they decided not to surrender for fear of reprisals. However, their stories contained gaps and contradictions. In the case of the U-977, its captain claimed to have carried out a prolonged underwater voyage using a snorkel, something technically possible, but extremely risky and unusual for such a long journey. What really aroused suspicion was what was missing from the ship. The U-530 was missing navigation logs, its deck gun had been jettisoned, and it wasn't carrying any visible cargo. This gave rise to speculation about possible secret missions, transporting Nazi gold, classified documents, or even evacuating high-ranking officials of the regime to South America before the German surrender. These theories were reinforced by the historical context. Argentina had been a frequent destination for German emigration and after the war became a refuge for several Nazi criminals. Although there is no conclusive evidence that these submarines were carrying important people, the temporal coincidence and the partial silence of official records fueled the doubt. Interrogations conducted by Argentine and US authorities failed to uncover any specific secret mission. The crew members were eventually repatriated and the submarines confiscated. However, many documents remained classified for years, and some reports were never fully clarified to the public. The mystery of the U-boat that reached Argentina lies not only in its journey, but also in what might have happened before its surrender. Did it carry out a final mission for the Reich? Did it unload something or someone before reaching the port? Or was it simply a desperate escape by sailors who refused to surrender? To this day, there is no definitive answer. For some historians, it is an episode exaggerated by myth. For others, it is further proof that the end of the Third Reich was rife with covert operations and convenient silences. The truth is that those submarines, emerging on the Argentine coast when the world was already celebrating peace, left a shadow of mystery that still sails between history and legend. The mysterious Allied bombing that was never officially recorded. Throughout World War II, Allied bombing raids on Europe were meticulously documented. Dates, targets, squadrons, and damage were recorded in thousands of military reports. However, among that enormous volume of documentation, there is a disturbing gap, accounts of an Allied bombing that, according to witnesses and some indirect sources, occurred but was never officially acknowledged. The mystery arises from civilian and military testimonies that describe a devastating air attack on a strategic area, apparently without obvious military value and of which there are no formal records in known Allied archives. Some accounts place the bombing in the final months of the war, when chaos, censorship, and operational urgency could justify deliberate omissions. Witnesses spoke of aircraft with Allied markings, nighttime explosions, and significant destruction. However, when subsequent researchers attempted to trace the event through British or American documents, they found no clear matches. This opened the door to multiple interpretations, from a case of mistaken identity to a covert operation deliberately erased from official records. One of the most debated theories suggests that the bombing may have been aimed at destroying sensitive facilities, such as secret depots, experimental factories, or archives that should not fall into enemy or Soviet hands. In this context, the documentary omission would have been intentional to protect strategic information or controversial decisions made in the final moments of the conflict. Another hypothesis points to a mistaken attack, a case of mistaken identity that caused significant civilian casualties. If so, the official silence could be explained as an attempt to avoid political scandals or moral questions, especially at a time when the Allies were seeking to consolidate their image as liberators after the war. There is also the possibility that the bombing was mistakenly attributed to the Allies and was actually a German operation carried out by captured aircraft or even conducted clandestinely with false identities. The air war, especially in its final phase, was rife with improvised missions and incomplete records. The central problem is the lack of conclusive physical evidence. In some locations indicated by witnesses, ammunition remnants and craters consistent with aerial bombardments have been found, but without clear markings that would allow for the definitive identification of those responsible. Without official documents, these clues remain trapped in a grey area of history. Decades later, the declassification of files has not completely solved the enigma. Although many dark episodes of the war have been clarified, this alleged bombing still does not fit into the established timelines. For some historians, it is a collection of confused memories. For others, it is an uncomfortable truth still hidden. The mysterious unrecorded Allied bombing serves as a reminder that even in widely studied conflicts, there are episodes that escape the control of official history. Whether due to censorship, error, or deliberate secrecy, this enigma remains a crack in the narrative of the war, a reminder that not everything that happened was recorded in the archives. Japanese Unit 731 and the files that disappeared. During World War II, while the world's attention was focused on the major battlefronts, one of the most secretive and sinister units of the conflict operated in northeastern China, Unit 731 of the Imperial Japanese Army. Officially presented as a medical research center, it was in reality a complex dedicated to biological and chemical experiments on human beings. After the end of the war, much of the information about his activities disappeared, giving rise to one of the most disturbing mysteries of the 20th century. Unit 731, led by General Shiro Ishii, conducted extreme experiments on Chinese, Korean, and Soviet prisoners of war and civilians. The victims were subjected to vivisection, biological weapons testing, freezing, deliberate infections, and other procedures designed to study the limits of the human body. Everything was carried out with a high level of organization and documentation, suggesting the existence of extensive scientific and military archives. However, as Japan neared defeat, the order was given to destroy evidence. Entire facilities were blown up, prisoners executed, and documents burned or scattered. Even so, it's hard to believe that a program of such magnitude could have been completely erased. The key question is what happened to the files that managed to survive this accelerated destruction. Part of the mystery is explained by the United States intervention after the war. Unlike the Nuremberg trials, many of those responsible for Unit 731 were not prosecuted. In exchange for their research and experimental data, several Japanese scientists received immunity. This raises the possibility that key documents were transferred, classified, or integrated into secret programs during the early years of the Cold War. The Soviet Union, for its part, did try some members of the unit at the Khabarovsk trials in 1949. There, chilling details were revealed that confirmed the scale of the crimes. However, even these trials were based on incomplete information, indicating that a substantial portion of the records were never made public. Over the decades, some documents and testimonies came to light, but only in fragments. Researchers and journalists have reported that entire archives remain classified or have simply disappeared into the hands of the victorious powers. This lack of transparency has prevented a full reconstruction of the scope of Unit 731's activities and the determination of the final outcome of its investigation. The mystery of the missing archives is not only a historical issue, but also a moral one. Without full access to the documentation, many victims were never officially recognized, and those responsible avoided accountability. Furthermore, concerns remain about how that data was used and whether it influenced the subsequent development of biological weapons. Unit 731 represents one of the darkest chapters of the war, and the silence surrounding its archives is part of that legacy. As long as documents remain hidden or destroyed, the story of these crimes will remain incomplete, reminding us that some secrets of World War II were not buried by time, but protected by power. The Nazi weapon that was never found, secret projects of the Reich. As the war turned against Germany, the Third Reich increasingly invested in the development of secret weapons capable of changing the course of the conflict. Under the concept of the so-called Wunderwaffen, or miracle weapons, the Nazis promoted advanced projects ranging from missiles and jet aircraft to technologies that seemed like science fiction for their time. However, among these programs, a persistent mystery emerged: the possible existence of an ultimate weapon that was never found or fully documented after the war. It is a proven fact that Germany developed revolutionary technologies such as the V-2 missiles and the Me-262 jet fighters. These advances demonstrated that the Reich was several years ahead in certain fields. However, partial documents and testimonies from engineers suggest that even more ambitious projects existed, kept under an extreme level of secrecy even within the Nazi military apparatus itself. Some sources mention directed energy weapons, sonic wave devices, electromagnetic weapons, and even prototypes related to nuclear fission. Although many of these ideas were still in the experimental stage, the speed with which Germany achieved technological advances fueled suspicions that certain projects may have reached a more advanced stage than officially acknowledged. The chaotic end of the war contributed to the disappearance of evidence. Laboratories were destroyed, scientists fled or were captured by the Allies in operations like Paperclip, and vast quantities of documents were seized or classified. In this process, some projects simply disappeared from known records, without it being possible to determine whether they were abandoned, hidden, or secretly moved. Some theories suggest that certain experimental weapons were dismantled and buried, or even moved out of Europe before the German surrender. Others maintain that the Allies deliberately concealed the existence of these projects in order to absorb the technology without causing public alarm. The lack of clear physical remains fuels the idea of a weapon that was never found. There are also those who believe that the weapon in question was never completed, but that its very conception represented such a great danger that it was suppressed from official accounts. In this sense, the mystery would not be so much a lost artifact, but the knowledge that surrounded its development. Most historians agree that no single weapon could have changed the outcome of the war. However, they admit that the full scope of the Reich's secret projects is still not fully known. Files that remain classified and contradictory testimonies prevent the case from being definitively closed. The Nazi weapon that was never found symbolizes the boundary between historical reality and military secrecy. It represents a question without a clear answer. How far did the Third Reich's technology truly extend, and what part of that knowledge vanished into the silence of the war's end? As long as those gaps persist, the mystery will continue to be one of the most intriguing shadows of World War II. The disappearance of the entire Soviet division in 1941. In the absolute chaos of the first months of the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, some of the greatest military defeats and confusions in modern history occurred. Millions of soldiers were surrounded, entire lines collapsed, and whole units ceased to exist. However, among these episodes, there is one that stands out for its enigmatic nature: the almost total disappearance of a Soviet division without clear records of its final destination. During Operation Barbarossa, the Red Army suffered devastating blows. Communications were poor, maps incomplete, and the chain of command easily broke down. In this context, several divisions were surrounded by German forces and annihilated. However, in the case of this particular unit, subsequent Soviet archives failed to determine precisely where, how, or when it was destroyed. Reports from the time mention the division advancing into a wooded and swampy area to reinforce a critical sector of the front. Shortly afterward, all contact was lost. There were no distress signals, combat reports, or clear lists of casualties or prisoners. The division simply disappeared from operational records, as if it had vanished into thin air. The most likely explanations point to a complete encirclement followed by the destruction of the unit, with most of its soldiers killed or captured. However, the absence of German documents confirming a victory of this magnitude is striking. There are also no identified mass graves that correspond to an entire division, which has fueled doubts. Another theory suggests that the unit fragmented. Small groups would have tried to escape on their own, mingling with other formations or joining the partisan resistance. In the chaos of 1941, many Soviet soldiers were left without command or orders, fighting in a scattered fashion for months. This might explain why the division's collective destiny could never be reconstructed. Soviet secrecy also played a key role. After the war, the regime avoided acknowledging humiliating defeats or command errors. Some archives were altered or simply classified, hindering the work of historians. It is possible that the disappearance of this division was, in part, deliberately erased to protect reputations and official narratives. With the partial opening of archives after the fall of the USSR, many obscure episodes from 1941 have been clarified. But this case remains unresolved. The available information continues to be fragmented, and the names of thousands of soldiers remain unknown. The disappearance of an entire Soviet division symbolizes the magnitude of the disaster experienced by the Red Army in the first months of the war. It is not just a lost unit, but an incomplete story, marked by silence, censorship, and chaos. A reminder that even in widely documented conflicts, there are battles that were fought without leaving a trace in official history. The Lost Squadron in the Bermuda Triangle of War. In December 1945, just months after the end of World War II, 5 American planes took off from a naval base in Florida for a routine training exercise. They never returned. This event, known as Flight 19, became the origin of the myth of the Lost Squadron and one of the most famous cases associated with the so-called Bermuda Triangle, a region that has since been shrouded in mystery. The aircraft were TBM Avenger torpedo bombers crewed by experienced U.S. Navy pilots. The mission consisted of a training flight over the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. However, during the flight, the squadron leader radioed that his instruments were malfunctioning and he could not determine his position. From that point on, communications became confused and increasingly alarming. According to the recordings, the pilots appeared completely disoriented. They believed they were over the Florida Keys when, in reality, according to later calculations, they were probably much farther east, over open water. The lack of visual references, coupled with bad weather and possible compass failures, turned a simple mission into a critical situation. The Navy immediately launched a large-scale rescue operation. Ironically, one of the planes sent to search for them also disappeared, further deepening the mystery. Although it is likely that the aircraft exploded in mid-air, the incident reinforced the feeling that something strange was happening in that area of the ocean. No conclusive remains of the planes or their crews were ever found. The official explanation pointed to a combination of human error, disorientation, and fuel exhaustion, which would have caused the planes to crash into the sea. However, the lack of clear physical evidence opened the door to more unsettling theories. Over the years, the case was reinterpreted and exaggerated, becoming linked to unexplained phenomena, magnetic anomalies, and even supernatural theories. Although many modern researchers consider Flight 19 to have been a tragedy caused by normal navigation and weather conditions, its cultural impact was enormous. The Lost Squadron does not belong directly to the battlefields of World War II, but it does belong to its chaotic end, when thousands of men continued to fly, sail, and die on missions that seemed routine. His disappearance marked the birth of one of the most enduring legends of the 20th century. Beyond the myth, the case of Flight 19 reminds us how fragile the technology of the time was and how unforgiving the ocean could be. A training exercise turned into an eternal enigma, closing this list of mysteries with a question that still resonates. What really happened to those planes that were lost in the sky and sea without leaving a trace? The unsolved murder of General George Patton. On December 21, 1945, just months after the end of World War II, one of the most famous and controversial generals in the United States died, George Patton. Officially, his death was the result of a traffic accident in occupied Germany. However, over time, the circumstances surrounding that event have given rise to one of the most debated mysteries of the post-war period. Was it truly a simple accident, or was there something more behind the general's death? Patton was traveling in an army car near Mannheim when the vehicle collided at low speed with a military truck. Unlike the other occupants, Patton suffered severe neck injuries that left him paralyzed. During the following days, he remained hospitalized, lucid and conscious, until he died suddenly from a pulmonary embolism. The contrast between the apparent minority of the accident and the severity of its outcome aroused suspicion from the outset. What fuels the mystery is the political context of the time. Patton was an uncomfortable figure, openly anti-communist, critical of the demilitarization policy, and in favor of a tougher stance against the Soviet Union. He had generated tensions even within the US High Command. Some of his public comments had already earned him reprimands and increasing isolation. Added to this was the fact that Patton had suggested the war wasn't truly over and that the real enemy lay in the east. For some, his ideas made him a dangerous figure at a time when the Allies were seeking stability and trying to avoid another global conflict. This gave rise to theories suggesting that his death may have been convenient for certain political interests. Proponents of the murder theory point to irregularities in the investigation. There was no thorough inquiry or in-depth questioning of those involved in the accident. The truck driver was never prosecuted, and the case was quickly closed. Furthermore, the fact that Patton was the only one seriously injured is for some difficult to explain. Other, more extreme theories suggest sabotage, silent assassinations, or even poisoning during his hospitalization. However, these hypotheses lack solid evidence and are based primarily on later testimonies and subsequent conjecture. The official medical version continues to maintain that the embolism was a known complication of the injuries suffered. Most historians agree that Patton's death was a tragic accident, but they admit that the handling of the case was surprisingly swift and opaque for someone of his stature. This lack of transparency has allowed the mystery to persist for decades. The unsolved murder of General George Patton straddles the line between documented history and lingering suspicion. Perhaps there was no conspiracy, but the unanswered questions, coupled with the general's volatile temperament and the delicate political climate of the post-war period, have made his death one of the most debated mysteries of the end of World War II. The encrypted message that no one has been able to decipher. During World War II, the Code War was as decisive as the battles on land, sea, and air. Encrypted messages traveled constantly between fronts, submarines, air bases, and high commands. Most of these codes were eventually broken, some even during the war itself. However, there is at least one encrypted message intercepted during the conflict that no one has yet been able to fully decipher. The message was picked up by Allied intelligence operators as a short, repetitive, and carefully structured transmission, but one that did not match any known encryption system. It did not correspond to Enigma, nor to Lorenz, nor to the already identified Japanese naval codes. Its exact origin remains uncertain, although it is believed to have been issued from European territory during a critical phase of the war. What was most disconcerting was that the message seemed too elaborate to be irrelevant. It wasn't noise, nor a test transmission. It had clear patterns, regular pauses, and a consistent length indicating that it contained concrete information. However, all attempts to apply known cryptographic methods failed. After the war, the message was archived along with other unsolved mysteries. Over the decades, independent cryptographers, mathematicians, and enthusiasts have attempted to break the code using modern techniques, including computer analysis. Even so, the content continues to resist as if it belonged to a completely different system or was deliberately designed to be undecipherable without a specific key. Some theories suggest that the message could have been a disinformation transmission created to confuse enemy interceptors. Others suggest that it was a high-level internal communication related to a secret operation that was never carried out. There is also the possibility that it was a one-time code whose key was destroyed immediately after its issuance. The mystery deepens because there are no clear references to the message in subsequent official documents. No one claimed authorship, nor were any instructions related to it found. It's as if it had been sent and then deliberately forgotten. This encrypted message represents one of the limits of historical knowledge. In a war where almost everything was recorded, analyzed, and archived, the existence of a communication that remains incomprehensible is unsettling. It reminds us that, even in the age of mass intelligence, there were secrets so well kept that they survived the test of time. To this day, the encrypted message remains undeciphered. Perhaps its meaning no longer matters, or perhaps it contains a truth that was never revealed. Whatever the case may be, it remains as proof that World War II still holds words that no one has managed to hear. Children stolen by the Lebensborn program, lost identities. During the Third Reich, the Nazi obsession with racial purity gave rise to one of the regime's most disturbing and least understood programs, Lebensborn. Officially presented as an initiative to support Aryan mothers and increase the German birth rate, the program concealed a much darker reality. Thousands of children were torn from their families in occupied territories, subjected to forced Germanization processes, and in many cases lost their identity forever. The Lebensborn program, created in 1935 under the direct control of the SS, began as a network of homes where women deemed racially fit could give birth in secret. However, as the war progressed, the program was transformed. In Eastern Europe, especially in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and the Soviet Union, the SS identified children with physical features considered Aryan and separated them from their parents, often by force. These children were subjected to racial and medical examinations. Those who met the criteria were sent to Germany, where their names were changed, documents were falsified, and they were given to German families or raised in state institutions. They were forbidden from speaking their native language and were educated to completely forget their origins. For the regime, they were not people but biological resources. Many parents never learned what happened to their children. In other cases, they were falsely told that the children had died of illness. The program's archives were deliberately destroyed in the final months of the war, making it extremely difficult to reconstruct events after 1945. After the conflict, the Allied authorities discovered the scale of the crime. Attempts were made to locate and repatriate the stolen children, but the process was chaotic and painful. Some no longer remembered their biological families, others resisted returning to war-torn countries, and many were never identified. Thousands grew up without knowing who they truly were. The psychological impact was profound. Many survivors of the Lebensborn program recounted years of confusion, loss of identity, and trauma. Some discovered their true origins decades later as adults by finding hidden documents or through modern genetic testing. For others, the truth never came. The mystery of the stolen children lies not only in the crime itself, but also in the stories that were left unfinished. How many were never found? How many died without ever knowing their true name or their real family? Even today, there are still people who suspect they were victims of the program and continue to seek answers. Lebensborn was not just a racial policy, but a deliberate rupture of lives and memories. The lost identities of those children represent one of the most silent wounds of the Second World War. A crime that didn't always leave behind bodies, but rather voids impossible to fill in history and in the lives of those who suffered it. The Nazi armored train that never appeared. In the final months of World War II, when the collapse of the Third Reich was inevitable, rumors began to circulate about a German armored train laden with untold treasure. According to these accounts, the convoy was carrying gold, jewels, works of art, and secret documents, and was sent west to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Red Army. However, the train never reached its destination and was never found, becoming one of the most persistent mysteries of the war. The story places the train traveling through mountainous and forested regions of Central Europe, particularly in what is now Poland. Amid the chaos of the Soviet advance, railway lines were destroyed, tunnels sealed, and routes altered. It is believed that the train was intentionally diverted to a hidden location, possibly an abandoned mine or a tunnel dug specifically to conceal it. What adds to the mystery is the existence of contradictory testimonies. Some former railway workers and local residents claim to have seen a heavily guarded train disappear into a remote area. Others spoke of secret orders issued by SS officers to hide valuable shipments far from the main routes. However, no official documents ever surfaced to confirm these operations. Over the decades, numerous expeditions have been organized to locate the train. Using metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and costly excavations, treasure hunters have explored tunnels and mountains without definitive results. Each partial discovery has rekindled hope, but the train still hasn't appeared. Some historians maintain that the train never existed as such, and that the story is a combination of several real transports exaggerated by myth. Others believe it was dismantled and its contents redistributed before the end of the war. However, the lack of conclusive evidence has not succeeded in closing the debate. The mystery also raises uncomfortable questions about what happened to the property looted by the Nazis. If the train existed, its contents would represent a significant portion of the wealth never recovered, belonging in many cases to victims of the regime. The Nazi armored train that never surfaced has become a symbol of the looting, secrecy, and chaos of the Third Reich's final days. Whether an amplified legend or a treasure still hidden underground, its story persists because it embodies an unanswered question. What else disappeared in the war's final days, and who profited from that silence? The real death of Benito Mussolini, contradictory versions. On April 28, 1945, as World War II drew to a close in Europe, Benito Mussolini was captured and executed by Italian partisans. Officially, his death marked the definitive end of the fascist regime in Italy. However, the exact circumstances of his execution have been the subject of contradictory versions, conflicting testimonies, and historical debates that have not yet been fully resolved. According to the most widely accepted version, Mussolini was attempting to flee to Switzerland with his mistress, Clara Petacci, hidden within a retreating German column. He was recognized, arrested in the town of Dongo, and taken to the village of Giulino di Mezzegra. There, on April 28th, both were executed by a partisan known as Colonel Valerio. This version was officially adopted by post-war Italy. However, doubts arose from the very beginning. Different partisans claimed to have been the actual executioners, offering contradictory accounts of the exact place, time, and manner in which the execution took place. Some claimed Mussolini died first, others that Petacci tried to protect him. There are even discrepancies about who gave the final order. Adding to these contradictions is the mystery of the documents Mussolini carried with him. It is believed he had compromising correspondence with Allied leaders, especially Winston Churchill. According to some theories, these documents were the real reason for a swift and poorly documented execution to prevent certain information from coming to light. These documents were never officially recovered. The treatment of the bodies also added to the mystery. The corpses of Mussolini, Petacci, and other fascist leaders were taken to Milan and hung upside down in the Piazzale Loreto, where they were humiliated by the crowd. This symbolic act was widely photographed, but at the same time it served to overshadow any serious investigation into the moments leading up to the dictator's death. There are even theories suggesting that Mussolini may have been assassinated before his official execution, or that foreign agents were involved in his death. Although these hypotheses lack conclusive evidence, they persist due to the lack of a clear and unified judicial investigation. Most historians agree that Mussolini was executed by partisans, but they also admit that the exact account was deliberately simplified in the post-war period to construct a convenient political narrative. The chaos of the moment, the multiplicity of actors, and the desire to quickly close the fascist chapter contributed to leaving many questions unanswered. The true death of Benito Mussolini remains shrouded in mystery, not because his end is doubted, but because contradictory accounts prevent us from knowing for certain how and why exactly it happened. It is one of those episodes where the official story exists, but the fragmented and confusing details continue to fuel the mystery to this day. The secret Nazi base in Antarctica. Since the end of World War II, one of the most persistent and controversial myths has been the alleged existence of a secret Nazi base in Antarctica. The story is usually placed in the region known as Neuschwabenland, a territory explored by Germany in 1938 to 1939, shortly before the outbreak of the conflict. From that royal expedition, a narrative emerged that over time mixed proven facts, documentary silences, and speculation. It is true that Nazi Germany sent a scientific mission to Antarctica for strategic and exploratory purposes. The main objective was to secure areas for whaling and symbolically claim territory. Swastika flags were dropped from the air and detailed maps were produced. However, the expedition was brief, and there is no direct evidence that permanent facilities were built on the continent. The mystery began in the post-war period. With the defeat of the Reich, rumors began to circulate that high-ranking Nazi officials had used secret routes to flee south, establishing an underground base in Antarctica where scientists, advanced technology, and even leaders of the regime were hidden. These theories were reinforced by the fact that some German submarines remained active weeks after the official end of the war. Another key element is Operation High Jump, a large-scale U.S. military mission conducted in Antarctica in 1946 to 1947. Although officially a scientific and training expedition, its unusual size led to speculation. Some believed it was an operation intended to locate or neutralize a secret Nazi base. However, the declassified documents do not support this interpretation. The alleged advanced German technology has also been mentioned, linking the Antarctic base to secret weapons or experimental projects. These ideas are usually based on late and unverified accounts, leading most historians to dismiss them as pseudo-history. The central problem is the complete lack of physical evidence. Despite decades of international scientific exploration in Antarctica, no remains of Nazi installations, artificial tunnels, or human activity consistent with a large-scale military base have ever been found. Furthermore, the extreme conditions of the continent would have made it almost impossible to maintain a secret facility without massive logistical support. Even so, the myth persists. The combination of a remote territory, little-known real expeditions, and the aura of secrecy surrounding the end of the Third Reich has kept the story alive. For many, the Nazi base in Antarctica represents the idea that not all the secrets of the war were revealed. Historically, there is no solid evidence to confirm the existence of a secret Nazi base in Antarctica. But as a cultural mystery and a symbol of the boundaries between history and conspiracy, it remains one of the most fascinating stories associated with World War II, reminding us how silence and the unknown can become legend. The mysterious total blackout of entire cities without an air attack. During World War II, blackouts were a common measure to protect cities from aerial bombardment. However, there are reports and testimonies of total blackouts affecting entire cities without any enemy attacks, confirmed air raid alerts, or clear official explanations. These brief but disturbing episodes became one of the lesser-known mysteries of the conflict. In several European countries, large urban centers were suddenly plunged into total darkness. These were not partial blackouts or isolated failures, but simultaneous and complete power outages that affected street lighting, factories, transportation systems, and communications. The strangest thing is that these events occurred at times when no air raid was expected. When the authorities responded, they offered vague explanations, technical tests, power grid failures, or preventative safety measures. However, in many cases, there were no detailed formal statements or complete technical records. This led to speculation about the true cause of the blackouts. One theory suggests that these could have been secret tests related to electronic warfare or internal sabotage. As the war progressed, both sides experimented with jamming, attacks on critical infrastructure, and covert operations designed to cripple the enemy without resorting to bombing. A total blackout would have been a silent demonstration of vulnerability. Another possibility is that it was due to human error or failures in electrical systems overloaded by wartime production. However, the timing of the outages and the lack of subsequent documentation make this explanation insufficient for some researchers. There are also accounts linking these blackouts to intelligence operations designed to conceal military movements, secret evacuations, or sensitive transports. In this context, the silence and lack of official records would have been intentional. Over time, many of these episodes were buried under the weight of larger events, massive bombings, invasions, and decisive defeats. Lacking visible destruction or direct casualties, the blackouts were considered minor incidents and were not thoroughly investigated. The mysterious total blackout of entire cities serves as a reminder that war hasn't always manifested itself in explosions and fire. Sometimes the weapon was silence, sudden darkness, and uncertainty. Without clear documents or definitive explanations, these episodes remain a shadow in the history of World War II, an enigma that has not yet been fully illuminated. The last secret that the Nazi leaders took to the grave. When the Third Reich collapsed, many of its top leaders died before facing full trials or speaking candidly. Some committed suicide, others were executed, and a few spent decades in prison without revealing everything they knew. From that final silence arises one of the greatest enigmas of the Second World War. What was the last great secret that the Nazi leaders took to their graves? Key figures such as Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, Joseph Goebbels, and Martin Bormann vanished without leaving behind detailed and verifiable confessions about crucial regime decisions. Even those who survived, like Albert Speer and Rudolph Hess, offered partial, contradictory, or clearly incomplete accounts. Each one kept information that was never fully verified. Among these potential secrets are undocumented agreements, hidden financial networks, informal pacts with foreign powers, the final destinations of looted goods, and the true extent of certain crimes. Doubt also persists about the full scope of Nazi post-war plans and what strategies existed for surviving underground after defeat. The problem wasn't just the deaths of these leaders, but the systematic destruction of archives in the final months of the war. Documents were burned, buried, or moved without record. Many eyewitnesses died in combat or were executed to silence them. Thus, the story became fragmented, dependent on personal memories and indirect evidence. The Nuremberg trials revealed unimaginable horrors, but even there, glaring gaps remained. The accused protected one another, minimized their responsibilities, or pleaded ignorance. In some cases, interrogators knew that additional information existed, but were never able to obtain it. This ultimate secret isn't necessarily a specific document or a particular conspiracy, but rather a complete truth that was never fully reconstructed. It's the sum of what wasn't said, what was hidden, and what was deliberately destroyed. A historical void created by the fear, guilt, and political expediency of the post-war period. That is why, more than 80 years later, the Second World War continues to generate unanswered questions. Not because there is a lack of information, but because those who had the definitive answers chose silence. And in that final silence, the Nazi leaders took to their graves one last secret that history to this day has not been able to wrest from them.